Hello world and welcome to Beamstream. So today I actually wanted to have an interesting take into what it means to grow an ecosystem for developers, right? I think oftentimes as developers we've always had this idea, at least on my end, to kind of create something that's open for developers to contribute. And anytime this sort of thought comes into place, we always think about open sourcing something, and at the same time, we want developers to adopt things as well, right? You want them as in the developers to adopt what you've created, or at least to be part of an ecosystem. So I've always found it interesting how a certain library, a certain tool that we use every day, how they came about and really how they actually gain traction in the first place. I've always been curious because growing a developer ecosystem has never been an easy thing to do. Now, of course, as software developers, we always try to solve problems first before we think about monetization, funding, and sustainability of a project. And at the same time, the timing matters quite a lot. The developer ecosystem, especially within the open source nature of technology these days, it's an ever competitive space, right? Even though we want to solve problems, we know that there are tools that we can contribute to already. So it's a pretty high barrier of entry, in my opinion, because there are so many different developer ecosystems today. So to kind of do an initial analysis as to how developer ecosystems are grown in the first place, I'm actually curious about the people behind the projects themselves, right? How long did they have to work before they got to where they are now, right? Just some initial analysis that I wanted to do. So when we actually have a look, there is quite a few ecosystems in place. And just for the sake of simplicity, I would class programming languages essentially in the low-level category of developer ecosystems. So I want to actually get a bit higher level than that and look at ecosystems within programming languages, like libraries or frameworks, right? So as you've seen, first off, I guess, is ES However, I just wanted to do some initial analysis with a potential competitor that they have, right? So this is a very simple chart sort of comparing two similar ecosystems with very similar goals and problems that they've tried to solve. Now, for those that don't know, ESBuild and SWC is a transpiler slash bundle, you know, bundle tool for the JavaScript ecosystem. And straight away, you can see some very interesting things, right? So, just for a bit of context, ES Build is around 6 years old as of in terms of GitHub histories, and with SWC they are currently 55 months old. How much is that in years, right? That's probably a better metric. So it's about 4.5 years. So there's already a bit of a difference, obviously, with time to market and development time and so on. But I will say what's interesting here is how long it took until the project gained serious traction, right? So just having a first look with, for example, with ES Build, it's taken nearly less, well, it says 4 years, I guess, but yeah, it's taken around 4 years to get up to the traction, well, to get up to this stage of explosive growth, explosive adoption from developers to join the ecosystem, which is very interesting because it with SWC, you can argue that it took 11 months of pure development in order to reach its explosive growth stage, right? Now, granted, the popularity relatively is very different. We can see how long actually contributors take when it comes to how long it takes them to finally be able to grow the technology as well as the adoption from developers. Now, it's interesting that we talk about community, but what does that actually mean when it comes to creating a community project? Because, one of the misperceptions that I think is around is that although the project is very much in nature by some standard mostly open source, it doesn't necessarily mean that contributions are open source. And what I mean by that, if we look into one of these ecosystems, starting off with ESBuild, what I like to do when I kind of evaluate technologies just in general is to actually look at how reliant it is on one person or not. Because, within enterprise grade selection of technology, it's important to have as least point of failures as possible. And that includes developer ecosystems or library contributors. So if we have a look at ESBuild's contributors, you'll notice that we come across Evan W. And for the most part, it looks like a very big disparity of contributions between one person and any other person preceding that, right? We can see that the amount of commits, additions, and deletions are very, very, high in disparity. Um, and if we actually have a look at the person that has developed this library for the most part, we come across Evan Wallace. Now, their professional work is that they currently work in Figma, or they used to, it looks like, and recently they've switched to working on ESBuild. Now, oftentimes, ecosystem builders, ecosystem, these people are usually very, very skilled developers, so much so that they have a very impressive track records. But the point remains that even though they are very much very smart, you can see that one project is reliant upon one person, which is very interesting, at least for this example. If we move on and look at SWC, which came out, which is a much earlier library compared to ESBuild, um, we can then do some more analysis on them and see that actually there is, once again, for the most part, one person with the most contributions. Granted, actually, though, that the contributions with other people have actually been quite significant, even though it's obviously not as much as a contributor. So, what does this mean as users of an ecosystem, as users of tools, right? When we evaluate tools, it's really important to have as least point of failures. And if I was to choose just based on the point of failures, I would say that SWC is probably more reliant than ESBuild, because you can see that although ESBuild is a much older ecosystem, you would have thought that they would have gained other developers who would gain expertise to look into the code base and to contribute and solve problems on their side. Except the former isn't true. Now, if we look at the actual creator behind SWC, they are currently actually working on a full-time job. They're a senior software developer at Vercel. And at the same time, I assume they're also working on SWC. They might have worked out a deal. One thing I will say, and that's sort of out of the scope of this analysis, is really about the funding, right? Where do they get their funding? How do they approach this notion of getting funded entirely. I'm not even entirely sure, so I won't question or discuss around those topics. For now, I just wanted to talk about really what it means to grow a developer ecosystem. So to me, I would say just from the outlook, from the number of contributors, experienced or not within the code base, it's clear to see that from a point of failure point of view, that SWC is a better ecosystem. However, we can also see that there is a lot more interest, although stars are just an indicator of popularity. The point is, people have had to click the star button on GitHub. That's why I think it's a valid metric. So, just going off that, we can see that they have a much higher rate of explosive growth compared to compared to SWC, which is interesting, but also given they have a lot more years to go to be compared to each other. Now, it's interesting that if we don't align the timeline and just go based off, from one growth stage to another, um, they are, for the most part, um, have the same pattern in that they've had to work a very long time. ES Build has had to work for 4 years in order to get up to this point. And at the same time, SWC has had to work just over a year to get to this steady growth. And at this point, it's interesting, right? It's interesting to evaluate these ecosystems. But then I kind of want to know other ecosystems, more particularly JavaScript ecosystems. So with that, I have another set of analysis within a different ecosystem. Now, in this case, I compare Vue.js and Svelte.js. So both of these, for those that don't know, are an ecosystem of its own. However, Vue.js is more of a progressive framework slash library, and Svelte is an ecosystem of its own, meaning, all the tool sets are relying on people understanding the Svelte ecosystem. Now, once again, when we try to analyze what's going on here, uh, to be honest, the cutoff point for example, with Vue.js is around the 2 year mark. At the 2 year mark, you can see that they've had explosive growth. And then for the years preceding that, they have, went astronomically high. Granted, in total now, Vue.js has been around for 9 years, compared to Svelte's 296 weeks, which in years it's around 5.5, just over 5.5 years, right? So yeah, it's 5.5 years, and let's actually analyze how long they took until they got popular. So we can already actually see just by eyeballing it that actually Svelte required a lot more time of development before they had an explosive growth stage, or rather an adoption stage. So actually, this may be a testament of an ecosystem versus a library and framework. But still, it's interesting to analyze these two specific libraries slash frameworks, right? So again, moving on, if we go to the contributor section, for those that don't already know, Vue.js has been a success story, especially when it comes to open source projects and what it means to be backed up by institutional. And we can see that actually, for the most part, the one with the most contributions, even though it's quite unfair, really, because they are the main creator and developer of this project. So, the disparity is going to be very, very high. So I would say maybe like 1.5k contributions in total is a good point to say this person knows what they're doing. So I will say it is well balanced out from a contributions perspective, and there is a community backing, right? It's not just about institutionals backing and funding the project. People are actually passionate about the ecosystem. So if we actually have a look at the creator themselves, and their profile, it's actually very impressive. I would advise people, if they haven't already, to definitely look into this person called Evan Yu, who's recently done, a very detailed documentary of how Vue.js came to be and how, they made their open source project a success. Because it truly highlights the one of the amazing things about open source technology, but also what it means for developers to be passionate about something. That's really important as well. So if we move on to Svelte and look at the contributors for Svelte, let's actually see how balanced or unbalanced they are. And actually, of course, as always, there is always a main contender because they are the creators of the project. But I would say they have a lot more contributions, even more so than Vue.js from a balance perspective, right? We can go down the page, and actually, most people have had more than 1.5 additions plus deletions of contributions in total. So it looks like people are definitely quite passionate about, being early to an ecosystem and its continuous growth. And if we look at the creator themselves as well, it's Rich Harris. Yeah, it's all green. I could not find additional information, but they also have a Twitter that they use quite frequently. And funny enough, they are also working at Vercel. So it's interesting that this kind of brings into the point that actually companies don't mind bringing in open source developers to work for their company, but also have some part funding, or rather some part time allocated to their open source project. It may be that at one point they've managed to agree to work on their specific open source project while being paid also full time with working for Vercel. I'm not sure, and I don't want to speculate, but I have seen that this is another avenue of funding when it comes to open source projects. So, having said all that, what does it actually mean, right? It's interesting because now that I look at the data, especially with the GitHub stars and the adoption of ecosystems, we can see that visibility isn't clear after a certain amount of years, right? We can see that, it's been about, once again, I have to do that calculation. 126 years is about nearly 2.5 years. So it took 2.5 years for Svelte to really take off and gain a lot more visibility than they already did. And at the same time, Vue.js had a cutoff point of 2 years to develop constantly until they had a main adoption phase. And it's the same thing with ESBuild and SWC. So we can actually see that, with open source, it is not just a success overnight. It's a constant nurturing of the project, constant dedication to a project to get people passionate about contributing to them. And now it's interesting, and it's really important to really have as least point of failures when it comes to becoming part of an ecosystem, even if that means consuming it. So what really constitutes as, success for a developer ecosystem is adoption as well as contribution, right? It's a two-part thing, kind of like a chicken and egg problem. You can't have a, and you can't have a chicken without an egg and vice versa, right? So I'm going to stop there. And, I've just wanted to kind of highlight how interesting it is for different ecosystems and how long it took for them to really make it, right? Especially within the open source nature of development projects today. And with that said, I would say that you should never think that it's too far gone or it's too saturated. I mean, quite recently we had Bun.js sort of make it, right, by it being developed in a very novel language like VLang. And now it's, gaining a lot of traction, a lot of contribution and adoption for those that really want to try it. So I'll stop there. Let me know if you found this video interesting. It's something that I've always wanted to talk about, and here I am today to talk about it. So if you like what you saw, please subscribe and like, and thanks for watching.